I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we are talking with Janet Boscarino of Clean Memphis, so stay with us for a conversation with Janet. Janet, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
You are co-founder, right, and executive director of Clean Memphis. Do
Exactly.
the 30-second snapshot for people who don't know, and then we'll start talking through
Sure.
the programs people maybe are familiar with, but a lot of things that you guys have taken on that maybe they're not familiar with. But
Sure.
do the quick
Do the elevator speech.
explanation. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So we're an environmental nonprofit organization in town. For years, we worked on organizing and supporting community cleanups. We now focus primarily on environmental education and training and supporting a zero waste future for Memphis.
Okay. Oh, so are you still? So that when I first met you years ago, when around the time this launched, it was more the cleanups and the big volunteer groups. Are you still doing those?
Yeah, we support those efforts. So I think what we've transitioned to, and this really happened during the pandemic when no one was doing cleanup projects anymore, right?
Yeah.
We really then began to look at other cities to see how they were addressing litter. And what we found during that research is that most cities are looking at litter as leakage from a broken solid waste system. And they were looking at it more broadly and looking at the issue of waste is something that you have to address if you're going to address litter. So we really have refined our approach. It's important for us to continue to support communities and help businesses who want to do cleanup projects, and we do that. But we're really focusing our efforts. We have 4 full-time teachers doing education, environmental education in schools.
Wow.
So building the future, stewards of the planet, but also looking at how can we do more on enforcement and prevention of litter, because the cleanup projects are ongoing. As soon as you finish, the litter's back down. It's expensive to continue. And so we've really got to, other cities are looking at waste reduction and waste diversion as a primary strategy that includes targeting litter.
So many questions. The 4 teachers strike me. So they're on your staff and they're just available to go to schools?
We have a set of schools that we work with.
Okay.
And so they are certified teachers and they are doing environmental STEM programming. We call it sustainable schools. So they are looking at energy conservation, water conservation, gardens and nutrition, waste management, just a variety of environmental STEM topics. And they visit the same school with the same students every other week. So they're building their focus on the standards. So whatever, it doesn't really matter if it's English, language arts, science, math, whatever it is, we've catered the lesson to include what they're focused on, what their standard is, but we have a hands-on activity or experiment or exploration that enhances and carries the message that we're trying to get across about environmental STEM.
And roughly what grades?
Primarily elementary and middle, but our sweet spot, we have a sort of 4th through 8 is our sweet spot. Yeah. And then during the pandemic, we had to transition to virtual, which we did that. I'm so proud of the ed team. They did that really, really, really well. And they also launched, because 2nd and 3rd grade is a critical year for 2 grades for us as well, but they're so focused on literacy, as they should be, that we've launched environmental book clubs for 2nd and 3rd grade, which is, so they're a series of 7 books, environmentally themed. They represent the students they culturally represent the students that we serve. And the book club lasts the whole year. We have guest readers. We do activities around those books. And then the students get to keep those books at the end of the year. So there's a lot of research around students being able to keep books in their home and improving student outcomes.
Yeah. The other one you mentioned is enforcement in terms of this kind of transition. And what does enforcement mean?
So we know Keep America Beautiful and several other organizations have done a fair amount of research about litter. And what they have found is that nearly 70%, I think 67% of litter is negligent, meaning it flies out of the back of a truck that's not tarped. And so there's a lot of opportunity. I know Keep Tennessee Beautiful is they did some training for law enforcement around tarping and pulling trucks over that aren't tarped to sort of prevent that. There are ordinance on, you are supposed to have a tarped load. And so it's hard to enforce, as you might imagine. As you know, obviously it's illegal to litter, but it's hard to enforce that, hard to catch people. But that enforcement piece is a big part of, if you think 67% of your litter is coming from negligence, that's not a behavior change. That's not something you can reach in that way. So there has to be some focus on enforcement to bring that down.
And what was the third thing that you said? You had another one.
So you have education outreach, you have enforcement, and then you also have infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yeah. And infrastructure means that if you're out in a public space, you need to have a place to dispose of waste. So making sure that you have waste receptacles, recycling receptacles in public parks and any public spaces that you have is important as well.
Yeah. Um, how much of that is Clean Memphis? How much of that is the city, the county, the state? You know,
Sure.
the who all is involved?
So many moving parts.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because we're also, one of the things that we're also doing is we have a 2-year research project that we have funded, and it's looking at the roles and responsibility of city government, county government, and state. How much money are we spending on litter pickup in public right of ways? Mowing, is it outsourced? What's the quality control on that? What are our opportunities for collaboration between different agencies? Because if you just look at an intersection, you have the state looking at part of that, the city looking at part of that. So really kind of getting down to looking at a snapshot of what are all the agencies doing, how much money are we putting into it across the board, and how does that compare to other cities? Are we spending $5 million on a $10 million problem? How can we get to the crux of that? So hopefully we'll have that research done by middle of next year, so we'll have a little bit better idea of that. But it is a public-private partnership in some of the ways with what I'm talking about. So we have the roles and responsibility of city government and county government for infrastructure. And then there's some ways, though, that the private sector can play a role. Like our organization, the reason we applied for this EPA grant is to be able to provide infrastructure to support reuse. So that's, there are not a lot of water refill stations around, and that's the crux of this grant, is to provide that infrastructure so that it makes it easy for people to make a better decision.
Again, for those who maybe just joined us, we're talking to Janet Boscarino of Clean Memphis today. Talk more about the EPA grant and what all that entails.
So when we finished our strategic planning process and we looked at how we have to attract to focus on waste and the reduction of waste, most cities are establishing zero waste circular economy goals. And what that means is they do a study of what your waste stream looks like and identify what the items are, and then look at what can you do with that. What can plastics be made into? Charlotte did this study, and they had a strategy to make uniforms out of recycled plastic for hospitals and hospitality. They were making concrete out of post-consumer glass. So there's these strategies that you got, and looking at that. So we've been advocating for the city to get their waste study done. There have been funding put in place from the city and the county to move forward with that. So that should start this fall, maybe in the spring. What comes out of that is you being able to then look at your waste stream and identify strategies to divert or either reduce. And so what we began to do then is look for opportunities to focus on source reduction. The EPA model is like an inverted pyramid, and the top strategy related to waste is source reduction. So if we can provide infrastructure to encourage people to do the right thing, then that can reduce litter in public spaces. So what we do know is that single-use plastic food and beverage packaging makes up about 85% of litter. And so water bottles in particularly are a large part of that problem. We find those when we're doing cleanup projects. They leak into our storm drain system. So they're entering the rivers and streams and ultimately in the ocean. So it's an enormous problem for plastic pollution. So encouraging reuse over single use is an important strategy to eliminate those single-use plastic bottles. And even though they're recyclable, only less than 30% of those across the nation are actually getting recycled. So reuse is a better strategy.
Talk about recycling for a second, because it just, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't there been a big shift that a lot of recycled materials from municipalities were going to China for a long time, where it was hopefully recycled, right? I mean, and the Chinese are not taking as much as they used to, and there have been municipalities, and just there's not as many places to send the recycled stuff. Is that's a national or international dynamic?
Sure. Yeah, it was. So maybe 2018, something like that, China stopped accepting exported waste from other countries because they didn't want to be the world's waste. They didn't want to do that. So it really rocked the recycling industry for sure. But I think it's been a great thing, because what we've had to do nationally is focus on how do we reduce the amount of waste we're producing, and how do we build systems and infrastructure to support that and move it into recycling. And so that the whole concept of zero waste and circular economy is starting back at the design element of packaging. Well, so historically, packaging has been put off on municipalities or consumers to dispose of. So the manufacturer did not have to be concerned with what, if it was recyclable or whatever. So there is a trend now. It's called extended producer responsibility. It started in Europe. It now has some legs in the States, California, and in the Northeast. And that extended producer responsibility puts pressure on the manufacturer to create a product that is easily either refurbished, remanufactured, or recyclable. Okay. And so now what you see is these cities all over. There are a number, Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte, Arizona, many cities who have established zero waste goals. And the way they're doing that is being focused on participating in a circular economy. So how can we divert waste from the landfill? How can we recycle more? How can we produce things that can be easily repaired, remanufactured? That kind of strategy.
And so the recycling, let's bring it back to Memphis. Right now, recycling, the stuff that you throw into your recycling bin at your house or wherever it is, where is that going?
So we have Republic Services manages the 2 landfills in Memphis, and they also manage the recycling. It's called a MRF, Materials Recovery Facility. Yeah. And we've toured it. We actually take residents and we take teachers, because we do professional development for teachers as well. We take them to tour that facility. They are recycling. Yeah. Recycling is happening.
It's happening here.
Yes.
Glass, wet plastic,
glass, aluminum,
metal,
cardboard, all of that's happening. The problem we have is lack of participation. Only about 8% of households are participating, and we have a very high contamination rate. People throw anything in there hoping it's going to be recycled, but that's not the case. It's more harmful for you to do that. Okay. And so I also think, without a question, during the pandemic, recycling was disrupted.
Yeah.
And off and on. So people have seen there is a distrust in the system at this point as well, where people believe that it's all going to the landfill. And quite honestly, if it is a material that they're having to hold, it's a commodity. If they can't sell it, eventually they're going to have to landfill it. So it's that need for circularity. What can we do with this? We need an end use for this product, or we don't need to be bringing it in. We don't need to be manufacturing something that we can't recycle or refurbish or remanufacture.
And how, this is a long question, but just how does a city affect that change? I can see how a state like California could say, "Hey, we're gonna put some regulations on top of manufacturers or consumer products and so on that come into California because they've got leverage. They're huge power. Same thing they do with emissions. They do that with a lot.
Right.
How does a city what leverage do they have when it comes to things like packaging and reuse and so on?
Well, I think what the first thing that the city and county have done here, and this is all in the Climate Action Plan and also in Memphis 3.0, it's just to push towards zero waste and a circular economy. And part of that is to start with the waste characterization study. And so it really starts with a waste characterization study that I mentioned, and the county and the city have now put the resources in place to get that study going. Okay. And that study will evaluate what we can do with our waste stream that is more economically friendly than landfilling it. So it has to you have to come at it not from an environmental aspect or issue, but as a economic development opportunity.
Yeah.
And then it is hard to influence business, but if you look at the major companies that are in town that we work with, the International Paper or FedEx, they are looking at zero waste is on their agenda. Yeah. So it's harder with maybe smaller to mid-sized companies, but if you can give them an opportunity and show them how that it can be done, most of those will come on board.
Okay. Well, again, we're here with Janet Boscarino. We'll talk more with her. We'll take a minute to do some housekeeping, though. One is that today, as this airs, it is election day, city election. So if you haven't voted, you should vote. Go to Shelby. If you don't know where to vote, but you're registered, you can go to shelbyvote.org and find out the district and, wherever you need to go, where your voting location is. We have been heavily doing, if you're not sure who you're voting for, a ton of election coverage in the Daily Memphian. All of that's on the Daily Memphian site on the homepage. You can go, you can read about all the candidates. You can get interviews with all the candidates, at least for mayor, you can get interviews with all the candidates, but also for the city council races, you can get a lot of information on those. That includes a series of interviews we did on Behind the Headlines over on WKNO with the top 7 mayoral candidates. All those are available if you want to see those. I should also remind everyone, the Sidebar airs here on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30, as I said, focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It is also one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Behind the Headlines podcast version of Behind the Headlines. I need to find a better way, Natalie, to say that, because what I end up doing is I say Behind the Headlines a lot, and it gets very confusing. So I'm going to work on that. But Behind the Headlines is available as a podcast and as a show on WKNO. We have the On the Record podcast that Bill Dries and sometimes Sam Hardiman do. We have the Memphis Grizzlies podcast as Grizzlies start firing up. And we have the food podcast, Soundbites, which Chris Harrington has been hosting for us since the very untimely passing of Jennifer Biggs. We also have restarted our Tigers podcast. Greg Gaston, local radio voice, is hosting that with our Tigers writers. That's also in our podcast feed. All of our podcasts are on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also go to the Daily Memphian site to get them. This show, as well as Soundbites, the food show, do, as I said, air on WYXR. You can get those at WYXR.org or the WYXR app. That includes not just our shows, but all the shows, talk, and music that WYXR does. Also, consider supporting WYXR. It is a nonprofit, listener-supported radio. You can become a member. You can donate. Go to the website or the app, and you can take care of that. You should also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Daily Memphian. We're a nonprofit, just a nonprofit news organization that just celebrated its 5th anniversary since launch. To that end, we've recently done a bunch of interviews. Dan Conaway, Andy Cates, board chair, co-founder, friend, all have been on doing episodes recently. We also had Kate and Jason, who are our technical leads, on a kind of behind the scenes look at how we actually get the news up on the site every week. Those are all available as recent Sidebar episodes. Coming up, another, maybe the last, but maybe not, of our sort of 5th anniversary shows. We'll have 3 people from the newsroom, 3 of the most key people in the newsroom, on to talk about their perspectives on Daily Memphian and our 5-year anniversary. We're also doing an interview with the folks from BPAC soon to talk about their lineup for this fall. Last bit of housekeeping. We have one of our business seminars coming up on October 19th at the Botanic Garden. That's the Developing Memphis seminar. They'll be, again, October 19th at 3:30. We'll be looking at the hotel market. We'll be looking at Malone Park Commons. We'll be looking at the Greyhound redevelopment, all those. And I think one more project that I'm leaving out. So that's October 19th, 3:30 at Botanic Gardens. You do need to get a ticket. You go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian, and you will be able to get a ticket to that. But we are still here with Janet Boscarino of Clean Memphis. Maybe we shift into some of the things you've also added in your 15 years, right? Mm-hmm. Give or take 15 years since you all launched, around food and food waste and just food and sustainability.
Sure. So in 2015, we brought Project Green Fork, the restaurant sustainability certification, under our umbrella. And in 2019, we were approached by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation to take on the issue of food waste in Memphis and Shelby County. And so just for those who do not know, each year in the United States, we spend about $230 billion growing and transporting food that's never eaten.
It's amazing.
We waste it. We lose that. And meanwhile, we have 1 in 6 people who are food insecure. And I think in Shelby County, that may be more like 1 in 4. So you have this extremely inefficient system. And so we took that work on through Project Green Fork. We have a partnership with Natural Resources Defense Council to provide technical support and strategic support. And so what that looks like is, again, source reduction, sort of like what we're doing with the EPA grant, looking at how we can work with restaurants, hospitalities, individuals. We know NRDC did they have a calculator where they took tons of data from Memphis and Shelby County, and they can tell us how much food we're losing by sector.
Yeah.
And they also can tell that we have about 5,000 tons of rescuable food each year that's currently being wasted. So we look at education outreach, doing waste audits to try to do the source reduction. We've also brought on someone, we did a landscape assessment with Innovate Memphis to look at our last mile organizations or feeding programs to better understand how they could, if they could take more rescued food and what they needed. Is it cold storage? Is it transportation? What is it? So we finished that work, and now we have hired someone that is being the connector for people who have surplus food and making sure that that food is being connected to a last mile or feeding organization. So we have, the airport now is donating food. Shelby Farms Event Space is donating food. The Renaissance Convention Center is now donating surplus food. And so it's this, we do safe food donation training. We connect them with a partner. And then we provided financial resources to the last mile organizations if they needed refrigeration, any of those things to get that work done.
I was just this last weekend at a conference in Phoenix, a local news kind of conference. And it doesn't matter, but it was a buffet,
sure.
For dinner and for lunch. And there's, all this food coming in and out.
Right.
And I don't know what they were doing, whether it was all being handled or not.
Right,
yeah. But many people, have been at that kind of banquet thing. It's a work event. It's something, whether it's at a hotel or a convention center or, an event center or something like that. Get in the weeds for a second. What are the best practices around? I'm kind of fascinated by this.
Sure.
Around, you've got a big bowl of salad. You've got a big platter of chicken breasts. You've got a big basket with rolls. And I don't mean to make light of it because it's really tragic. Like you said, right. 1 in 4 people food insecure and this incredible amount of food waste. How best do the caterer or facility handle that food to, as you say, safely and get it to people who don't have enough food?
Sure. So what our team does, we work with the caterer or the event space to help them sort of, as best they can, meet the demand. You can't run out of food in that situation, so you're always going to have to overproduce.
Right.
So there are some strategies to keep food in the back. Anything that's been placed out front cannot be donated.
Yeah.
That's a safety. It could have been touched or something
really
like that.
It won't.
It will not be
because somebody could have breathed on it.
100%. So you can't do anything with that. But what you can do is stage bringing out things so that you keep things back of house, as we call it, and keep it temperature controlled until you're ready to bring it out.
And you sort of become conscious of how much you're bringing out.
You're conscious
because
of how
if you know
much.
you're gonna, I would just think there's a mindset change of, if I know all this isn't going to go to waste. All that's going to go to waste is what I bring out front.
Right.
Let's figure out a way to bring out.
You meter it out.
70% of we normally do or something,
Exactly.
and then we just bring it more quickly because we've said this is a priority. We know we're going to have remnant. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So the rest is kept back of house and it's temperature controlled. And then we teach them how to package it. We have a stamp label that shows, the date, if there's any type of allergies that you should be concerned about. And then they keep it refrigerated and that donation partner comes to pick it up. And we also just now we purchased the license to an app called Carrot that works a little bit almost like Uber for them. So if you have you have surplus food, you package it, you weigh it, you put it out on the app, and then someone or a feeding program can capture that and come and pick it up. And it also tracks metrics for us. We have a goal that is aligned with the national goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So it's one of the ways we're tracking metrics. We just did this over the weekend with Mempho. Okay. And so there was surplus food for Fuel was catering for bands and all of that,
backstage
and
kind
so
of stuff, they were gotcha.
They were fabulous to work with. They managed that process, and then we were able to connect them with Room in the Inn, which is a wonderful program that also feeds people. And so it's great for them to receive the surplus. It's all high quality, high nutrition food that would otherwise be wasted.
Yeah, but we had Room in the Inn executive director on one. Or no, the executive director. I'm looking at Natalie here. Yeah,
and there's some policy around that too. We're really getting ready to advocate. One of the national policies that we're trying to push through, and we're working on it at the state level, is there's a lot of confusion about date labeling. It's best by used.
Oh gosh, don't get me started on this.
Yeah. So fun fact for you: the only date that has any real significance is on baby formula because it's fortified, so it loses some of its fortification if it go beyond the date. The rest is really more about peak freshness or about when stores need to move it. And so there's so much confusion.
It's not have to take this out and send this to my daughter because we have this argument about expiration dates. And she's like, if it's one day over, she's like, that's got to be thrown away. Like, I'm going to die. You're going to kill me. Dad, you're killing me.
Exactly.
And we've had this argument for years now.
Is dairy.
The
exception might be dairy.
Dairy, yeah, that's true. But that one, you almost don't need the expiration. You just open it and it's
actually the general rule of thumb is if it looks good and it smells good, it's probably good. But I think
this is mind-blowing for people.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing for people. And so the estimates is that we're losing about 15% of our food just because of the lack of standardized date labeling.
Yeah. Again, we're going to take this out, Natalie, and send this to Mackenzie, and I'm going to win an argument, which is always great. Project Green Fork, people see it's been around for a while. People see the stickers. If they go to restaurants, they see. But talk about what it does, maybe how it's evolved. You mentioned that it's now under your umbrella, but what does that mean for people who sort of maybe just notice, it's part of Project Green Fork, but I don't know what that means that this restaurant is in the
Project Green Fork. So I'm glad you asked that because we're doing two things with PGF right now. And so it means that they are taking 6 steps to be more sustainable. They compost, they recycle, they use compostable or recycled products rather than styrofoam. They use green cleaning products. There's a variety of things that they do to take extra steps to be more sustainable. Now, that's the basic certification that the restaurants do. Now, we have just launched a restaurant challenge where we're working with a set of restaurants. We started in Crosstown, Evergreen area. So we have 8 restaurants that are participating in a challenge right now, like Global Cafe, Lucy J's, Echo, and Tonica, and there's a whole list of them. Anyway, what we did with them is we did a waste assessment. So we held their waste literally for a day, sorted and weighed the waste, photographed it, and gave them pictures and recommendations for how they could reduce food waste in their kitchens. That was super helpful for them. They're now taking a combination of strategies to help reduce food waste as part of this restaurant challenge. That'll wrap up in October, and then we're moving downtown. So we've already been onboarding restaurants downtown to do the same thing. So this gives us an opportunity to work through Project Green Fork and incorporate sustainable practices and food waste strategies with restaurants that are not currently Project Green Fork certified. But it brings awareness and hopefully cost savings to them.
Yeah, I was going to say that's got to be heavy on their minds. I mean, even the most well-intended restaurant owner right now. I mean, restaurants are a tough business in any circumstance. Right. Coming off COVID, get all
thin
the
margins always.
Good Lord, yeah. With just about a minute left, why? How did you get into this work? Why is this the work you do?
I was in business development for 20 years, but I've always been environmentally inclined. And I was traveling a lot when I was working before in business development and would go to other cities and feel like they had, particularly I remember being at a conference in Minneapolis in downtown, and it looked very intentional. It was clean. There were receptacles outside. The landscaping was just very intentional. And it just made me think that we could do more and we could do better. And I just wanted to be a part of something, create an opportunity for other people to get involved in making Memphis everything it could be. Yeah.
And there are lots of ways people can get involved with this, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So they go to projectgreenfork.org and they can learn more about
or cleanmemphis.org. Look for our water refill stations. We just installed 15 water refill stations at parks. You'll see them wrapped. At the bottom, it'll be the Memphis Sand Aquifer, and at the top, it'll say choose to reuse. And on the arm, it'll say proudly serving Memphis tap water. And we're just encouraging people to use reusable water over single-use plastic water bottles because they rarely get recycled and they often end up as litter.
Yeah. Last question I always ask people, what was the first concert you went to?
Oh, I think, honestly, I think it was Daryl Hall and John Oates.
That's great. That's a first, I think.
I think so. And nice. I was probably 13. So
was that
I'm not even sure how I went with them.
You're from Memphis,
yeah, I'm
right?
from it. So it was at the Coliseum, I'm sure, at that point.
That's a good
Private
one.
Eye.
That's a great one.
I guess I'm proud of that. I don't know. Hey, I can be
proud. I don't think anyone should ever be ashamed about their first concert. You know what I mean?
I'm sure I had a great time.
Yeah.
I'm sure I had a great time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Janet Boscarino, again, people can learn more by going to cleanmemphis.org. Thanks for being here. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full episode online at WYXR or at Daily Memphian or as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.